This is Casey. Casey just got home from one of those days. She's tired, hungry, and would not consider herself to be in a good mood. Upon arriving home, she opens her computer and scrolls through social media. As she does, she finds an advertisement for a pretty dress. Having had one of those days, Casey is looking for something to cheer her up and decides to do a bit of online shopping. After seeing the prices, she decides not to make a purchase for herself just yet. However, she remembers that Mother's Day is just around the corner. Her mum lives far away, and so she thinks, perhaps I'll send her a present, a hamper or maybe some chocolates. She browses for a while before remembering that she's terribly hungry. Casey looks up places online and decides to order some food. Ultimately, she grabs herself some Uber Eats and soon will be eating and then decide that she really does like that dress. She'll purchase it while she eats and she'll feel better about her day. Now, dear viewer, let me ask you this. Were Casey's choices her own? Let's review. The learning process. One of various internal factors that allow us to understand the consumer decision-making process. This will allow us to understand Casey's motivations. The learning process describes an ongoing activity where knowledge is constantly being absorbed, interpreted, and revised. When considering it with consumer behaviour, learning is a relatively permanent change in behaviour that is caused by experience. This is what we see from Casey. Her experiences have been shaped by the acquisition of knowledge. Behavioural learning theories assume that our learning is a result of how we respond to external events, how our actions result in rewards and punishments, and how these influence future responses to similar situations. The behaviour that Casey displays can be categorised into two learning theories. The first, based on automatic, instinctive response, and the second on high-order reasoned thinking. It is also important to consider the influence of observational learning. These items, in conjunction with an understanding of the perceptual process, will allow us to understand the power of external stimuli in marketing, and thus Casey's decisions. To begin, we look at classical conditioning. Classical conditioning occurs when a stimulus that elicits a response is paired with another stimulus that initially doesn't elicit a response. Over time, this second stimulus causes a similar response because it is associated with the first. This can be seen in Casey. When she's exposed to advertisements for the dress, food, and Mother's Day gifts. The advertisement for the dress shops are coupled with the event of a party. This causes Casey to associate an unconditioned stimulus with which naturally causes a response, the party, and the conditioned stimulus that does not naturally cause a response, the dress. These work together to create a conditioned response. This is also evident in the food advertisements in regards to the association with happiness and the Mother's Day hamper association with a happy parent. Instrumental conditioning or operant conditioning is another key item that we see Casey experience. This kind of conditioning occurs as the individual learns to perform behaviours that produce positive outcomes and avoid behaviours that yield negative outcomes. This can occur in one of three ways: through positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, or punishment. Principles of operant conditioning are at work when a consumer is rewarded or is punished for a purchase decision. This can be seen through Casey's actions in the form of a reinforcement schedule. A schedule of reinforcement is essentially a rule stating which instances of behaviour will be reinforced. In some cases, a behaviour might be reinforced every time it occurs. In others, often, or sometimes. Casey experiences fixed interval reinforcement when she receives rewards for going to the same food provider on Uber Eats consistently. In the video, we see Casey order from a restaurant for the 5th time and receive a discount as a result. Fixed ratio schedules are those in which a response is reinforced only after a specified number of responses. This schedule produces a high, steady rate of responding with only a brief pause after the delivery of the reinforcer. It encourages brand loyalty and brand equity. The next thing that we must consider is observational learning. This occurs when people watch the actions of others and note reinforcements received for their behaviours. This learning occurs as a result of vicarious rather than direct experience. We see this in Casey in the process of modelling, whereby she imitates the behaviour of others. Earlier in the day, Casey had been told by her co-workers all about their Mother's Day plans, how they had gone to the effort of providing gifts, even though they lived far away from their family, and how pleased their mothers would be. Then as Casey scrolls through social media, she sees advertisements for Mother's Day gifts. The ads that she sees show parents, mothers, extremely happy and feeling loved as they receive jewelry from their daughter. Consumers learn vicariously by seeing others receive reinforcement for their behaviours as stated. Marketeers can reinforce or can punish consumers indirectly by showing them what happens to desirable models who do or don't use their products. The components of observational learning are attention, retention, product processes, motivation. In this case, Casey wants to imitate what she has seen, and so this causes her to act accordingly and move through this process. She notices the behaviour of her friend and then the subsequent advertisement's daughter, and she retains this information. She then searches for a website to evaluate further. She sees sales and promotions, and that motivates her, and thus the consumer, Casey, acquires and forms the behaviour that she has seen modelled. The final element that should be considered is that of the perceptual process. Perception can be best understood as how individuals interpret the world around them and how they make sense of information. This process begins when receptors interact with sensory stimuli. The stimuli that we absorb then evaluate and interpret meaning from based on how we process knowledge. Perception with regards to learning can then be summarized as the process of absorbing, organizing, and deciphering data. As said, the key stages of the perceptual process first involve sensory stimuli. This is the sounds, sights, smells, tastes, and textures that are experienced by a consumer. We then must consider the sensory receptors, whereby our eyes, ears, skin, mouth, nose encounter and interpret information. This then incites the following stages in the perception process: exposure, attention, and interpretation. The attention stage. This happens when a person gives mental processing capacity to external stimuli from a given product or brand. Consumers generally pay attention to messages that are consistent with their own views and beliefs or needs. In the video, Casey is exposed to sights and sounds as she online shops. Red is a colour often associated with impulse buying, and we see this show up along in the advertisements for the dresses. We see something similar in the use of sound in the Mother's Day gift and with regards to food. The sound of food cooking is used to incite hunger, as is visuals, and similarly, warm tones, music, and a calming voice is used to associate the Mother's Day gifts with feelings of contentment. The interpretation stage. Interpretation occurs when a person gives meaning to the sensory stimuli. This understanding is supported by a combination of already existing expectations and a familiarity with what is being represented. Marketing relies on the interpretation stage to communicate and represent their brand. This, in combination with the stimuli Casey experiences, serves to push previous feelings of expectation and familiarity with that of happiness. Casey is encouraged to feel happy and to feel content by the stimulus. The retention stage. The final part of the perception process is the retention stage. This is defined by the storing of information in long-term memory. Casey has been influenced by the stimuli she is exposed to, and this has translated into Casey storing information about the stated products and brands long-term. Thus, the perceptual process is an effective paradigm for analysing the influence of varying factors on buying behaviour. To summarise, are Casey's choices her own? When considering the influence of classical conditioning, operant conditioning, observational learning, and how this is stimulated by the perceptual process, it is clear that Casey is not entirely objective in her decision-making. Ethics is highly important with relation to consumer marketing, and we must consider the power of learning. However, it can also be said that Casey was pleased with her actions in the video. So, when asking the question of if Casey's choices were her own, I instead ask you, what do you think?